Midnight Static Files. The story you are about to hear has its roots hidden in the darkness of reality. It's up to you to believe it or not.
Imagine standing in pitch-black darkness, unable to see your own hand in front of your face. But then a flash of lightning cracks across the sky, and for a split second, the blinding light reveals a towering, monstrous entity standing right beside you, staring down into your soul. When the light vanishes, the creature is still there, breathing in the shadows, waiting for the next flash. This isn't a nightmare. This was the terrifying reality for Rana and Rashid on a stormy night that defied the very laws of time. This terrifying chain of events unfolded in the life of Rana Ahmed and his close childhood friend, Rashid. Today, Rashid is working miles away from home in the coastal city of Yanbu, Saudi Arabia. They live in the very same village, and since their childhood days, there has always been a deep, unbreakable bond of intimacy between them. But the incident that changed their lives forever happened several years ago, during a punishingly hot summer evening. The air was thick, suffocating, and heavy with heat. Seeking relief, the two friends had walked out to the edge of the local riverbank, sitting close together, just talking and trying to catch a breath of cool air. As they sat there, the atmosphere began to shift dramatically. Massive, dark storm clouds started to gather rapidly across the night sky. Right at that moment, the distant, haunting melody of the microphone began echoing from a faraway mosque, broadcasting the call for the Isha prayer. The sacred words of Allahu Akbar drifted through the humid air and struck their ears. Hearing the call, Rashid turned to his friend and said, "Rana, look, the sky is getting completely dark and cloudy. It feels like it's going to rain heavily, which will finally cool down this terrible weather. Since the river is right here, let's jump in and take a quick bath." Rana thought about it and agreed. For them, bathing in the river was a completely natural habit, whether it was the middle of the day or the dead of night. They stood up from where they were chatting and walked directly down to the riverbank. The walk from their seating spot to the water's edge took exactly 3 minutes. Once there, they waded into the water and began washing themselves, enjoying the cool relief. They continued bathing for about 10 minutes, completely relaxed and laughing. Suddenly, out of nowhere, the entire atmosphere shattered into pure terror. Without a single word of warning, Rashid reached out through the dark water, violently grabbed Rana's hand with a trembling grip, and screamed in a panicked, breathless voice, "Rana, get up right now! Run, run!" Rana was completely caught off guard, his mind spinning in total confusion as he struggled to understand why his friend was suddenly panicking. Why should he run all of a sudden out of the water? But before he could even utter a question, a massive flash of lightning ripped through the pitch-black sky, striking the earth with a deafening roar. Rana noticed with horror that it didn't just strike once. The lightning was flashing aggressively and repeatedly, illuminating the entire landscape over and over again. First, Rana scrambled out of the dark water, followed closely by Rashid, and both of them began sprinting with all their might. Rashid kept shouting, telling Rana to stay ahead of him, pushing him forward while he chose to stay directly behind. In a voice thick with absolute dread, Rashid barked out a chilling order. "Rana, Kabardar, do not look back under any circumstance. Let's just run straight ahead." As they ran blindly into the dark, Rashid began reciting religious prayers and Islamic supplications at the top of his lungs. At that moment, Rana's mind was racing, completely unable to comprehend the deeper horror of what was actually happening. He was rationalizing the fear, thinking that because violent lightning was continuously striking from the sky, Rashid was simply terrified of an immediate strike hitting the water. Rana knew very well that if lightning struck the river, the powerful electricity would spread instantly through the water, causing undeniable, fatal damage to anyone inside. He assumed that was the sole reason they were being forced to hurry up and flee. He had absolutely no idea that something far more sinister was chasing them from the riverbank, and because of that ignorance, he didn't realize why their desperate run was about to defy the laws of space and time. They kept running, their lungs burning, sprinting with every ounce of strength left in their bodies. The path back to Rashid's house from the river was a familiar short route, normally a peaceful 5-minute walk. They had only gone a little further from the house to sit and chat before walking those 3 minutes down to take a bath. Given the blistering speed at which they were sprinting, they should have reached the front door in a single minute at the very most. Yet they ran and ran, and the path seemed to stretch into an endless, terrifying void. They could clearly see the bright, welcoming electric lights glowing from the side of the house, but no matter how fast they moved, they simply could not arrive. The road had become an infinite loop, trapping them in the dark as time itself began to distort around them. When they finally broke through the invisible barrier and collapsed into the courtyard of Rashid's house, both young men were utterly exhausted, trembling and gasping for air. After resting for a few moments to catch their breath, a deep sense of unease filled the air. They called out to a few people in the house, and because a strange dread hung over the night, those family members insisted on walking Rana all the way back to his own home to ensure his safety. Rana was still completely clueless, wondering why on earth they were sending a group of people to escort him when his house was just a short, safe distance away. That bizarre night passed in silence, with everyone retreating to their own beds, completely unsettled. The true, horrifying revelation came the very next morning. Rana sought out Rashid, demanding answers about the chaotic events of the night. He pointed out a glaring, impossible anomaly. "Rashid, when I finally reached home last night, I checked the clock and it was already 11:30 p.m. How is that even humanly possible?" The call for Isha came at roughly 8:30 p.m. From there, we walked for 3 minutes, bathed for exactly 10 minutes, and ran straight back. We should have been inside by 9 p.m. at the absolute latest. Where did 2.5 hours vanish into thin air? It was then that Rashid looked at him with pale, haunted eyes and delivered a piece of terrible, bone-chilling information. Rashid explained that while they were submerged in the water, a small bridge stood crossing the river just a short distance away from their bathing spot, featuring a deep, dark hole gaping on one side. As the violent lightning began to tear through the clouds, the blinding flashes illuminated the bridge. In that sudden, electric light, Rashid froze as he witnessed a long, impossibly slender figure slowly floating up out of the river water. Every time the lightning cracked and flashed, the monstrous thing would gleam slightly in the darkness. Rashid stood paralyzed, watching this otherworldly anomaly for an extended period of time. At one terrifying point, the entity rose entirely out of the river, standing completely erect and towering high above the surface of the water. The moment the lightning stopped, the pitch-black darkness swallowed the creature, making its existence completely invisible to the naked eye. In the dark, there should have been some silhouette, but there was absolutely nothing. The entity's horrific form could only be perceived when the lightning flashed. Rashid admitted he initially doubted his own senses, aggressively rubbing his eyes over and over again to check if his mind was playing tricks on him or if he was simply seeing illusions in the shadows. But as the relentless lightning continued to strike, the exact same monstrous shape appeared over and over, until finally the creature's face materialized clearly before him. It possessed a hideous, monstrous, and terrifying shape that defied human comprehension. Knowing that explaining this to Rana in the water would take too much time and expose them to an immediate, fatal attack, Rashid grabbed his hand and ordered him to run blindly without ever looking back. The supernatural distortion of that entity was the sole reason their 5-minute run had consumed over 2 hours of reality. Hearing this incredible tale, Rana simply could not bring himself to believe it. He shook his head, thoroughly convinced that Rashid was just playing a highly elaborate, cruel joke on him to scare him after a strange night. Even though many people in the village knew that there was an unnatural, historical problem associated with that specific spot near the river bridge, Rana brushed it off as mere superstition. But the supernatural has a twisted way of forcing skeptics to face the truth. That very same night, the two friends found themselves sitting together once again, passing the time and chatting late into the evening. This time, however, they were sitting on the flat roof of a one-story house right next to their home. As they sat gossiping under the open sky, the weather suddenly took a familiar, ominous turn. Thick, heavy clouds swirled into the sky out of nowhere, and sharp flashes of lightning began to rip through the darkness. It was the peak of that volatile season, so sudden storms were expected, but the dread in the air felt entirely different. As the lightning crackled relentlessly, Rashid suddenly froze mid-sentence. He turned his head to one side, completely fixing his gaze on a single point in the distance. With a trembling hand, Rashid pointed out into the open field and whispered, "Rana, can you see anything over there? Look closely where I'm pointing. Can you see it?" At first glance, Rana peered into the dark and couldn't see a single thing. But a second later, a massive streak of lightning cracked across the sky, completely illuminating the entire area. In that brilliant, fleeting flash of light, Rana's heart stopped. Standing out in the open was a giant, towering, monstrous creature. Its structural form resembled that of a human, but it was running around with a wild, unnatural speed. The moment the lightning faded, the landscape plunged back into pitch-black darkness, and the entity vanished instantly from sight, as if it had never existed. Rana rubbed his eyes, paralyzed with fear. Every single time the lightning struck, the monstrous entity appeared clearly, running wildly, and every time the lightning stopped, the dark sky swallowed it whole, leaving no trace of its terrifying presence. It was completely invisible to the human eye in the dark, revealing its horrific existence only when fed by the raw light of electricity. Horrified by the realization that they were witnessing the exact same demonic entity from the riverbank, both young men scrambled to their feet and rushed down from the rooftop into the safety of the house. Rana finally understood the grim reality of what Rashid had seen while bathing, thanking Allah for saving their lives from what could have been a truly terrible disaster. A few days later, another chilling incident occurred involving Rashid, Rana, and their mutual friend, Rakib. Rakib and Rashid lived right next to each other, a little further down from Rana's house. Late into the night, Rashid and Rakib were sitting together, completely absorbed in playing the PUBG game on their Android phones. They lost track of time entirely, playing for hours until the absolute dead of night. Realizing how late it had gotten, they finally decided to turn off their phones, freshen up, and go inside to sleep. But before going to bed, they needed to step outside to drink water and handle their business. As they stepped out, the two friends walked in opposite directions to give each other space. But the moment they neared a thick, dark bush at the edge of the property, a bizarre, unsettling sound drifted out from deep within the leaves. It was a low, rhythmic noise that sounded exactly like a person performing religious dhikr, except the word wasn't being pronounced by a mouth. Instead, it was a heavy, terrifying hum-hum sound, vibrating deeply through a rhythmic breath. At first, they froze, trying to rationalize the sound by thinking it might be a wild animal, like a stray fox roaming the village at night, but they knew foxes never made such deeply human, rhythmic sounds. Listening intently to locate the exact source, they confirmed it was coming from right inside the thickest part of the bush. Terrified, they huddled back together, whispering in fear about what this could possibly be. They wondered if their presence at night had offended a hidden entity, causing it to make these ghostly sounds to scare them away. Desperate for answers, they pulled out their mobile phones and turned on the flashlights, pointing the beams directly into the dark foliage. Strangely, the moment the flashlight beams hit the bush, the sound stopped completely. But the very second they clicked the flashlights off, the heavy breathing and rhythmic humming started right back up in the pitch black. Realizing they were playing a dangerous game with an invisible presence, they quickly turned and ran back inside the house. Fortunately, by the grace of Allah, they weren't physically attacked, didn't fall ill with a sudden fever, and were completely spared from demonic possession. The supernatural anomalies of this region stretched far beyond the riverbank, touching the lives of many others. In the first week of August 2025, a terrifying event took place in Rajabari village, located within the Trishul Upazila of the Mimensing district. A young man named Tanbar sent in this chilling account, which happened to his own sister. She was newly married and living at her in-laws' house in an upazila within Mimensing. Late one night, while she was deeply asleep right next to her husband, she was suddenly jolted awake by a very familiar voice calling out from the pitch-black darkness outside. The voice belonged to no one in her in-laws' home. It was the unmistakable, distinct voice of her very own father. From the absolute darkness beyond the walls, the voice pleaded desperately, "My child, I am very sick. Don't open the door." The sister sat up in bed, her heart hammering against her ribs. She wondered in absolute shock how her father could have traveled such an immense distance in the dead of night, especially while being severely ill. A moment later, a heavy rhythmic knock echoed against the bedroom door, and the exact same words repeated, "My child, I am very sick. Don't open the door." She heard this ghostly night call echo several times through the room. Her husband remained fast asleep beside her, completely undisturbed, and she chose not to wake him, fearing that he might panic or that some severe trouble would unfold. She lay perfectly still in the dark until morning arrived. As soon as the sun rose, she gathered her in-laws and recounted the terrifying experience, before immediately calling her father on the phone. To her utter shock, her father was completely healthy, thanking God, and stated he had absolutely no reason to travel to her home that night. The realization sent a shiver through the household. Her in-laws knew this was no mere dream, but a malicious entity mimicking her loved ones to cause a serious, dark disaster. Recognizing the immediate danger, the in-laws did not delay for a single moment. They quickly contacted a relative who happened to be an experienced spiritual healer, Iraqi, and requested his urgent help. On Friday, the healer arrived at the house and immediately prepared to perform a powerful ruqya cleansing session on the sister. He had her sit upright on a bed while he took his seat on a chair directly in front of her. As the holy verses began to echo through the room, several family members pulled out their mobile phones, capturing the entire intense session on video. Within a remarkably short period of time, the room's energy shifted drastically. The sister's body began to sway aggressively back and forth, indicating that an unnatural force had taken control. The Rocky looked directly at her and demanded in a commanding voice, "Who are you, and where do you come from?" At first, there was only a chilling silence. After being asked repeatedly, the entity finally spoke through her mouth, but it didn't use a terrifying dual-toned, demonic voice or a gurgling sound. Instead, it spoke in the sister's exact normal voice, whining over and over again, "My legs hurt. My legs hurt." No matter what questions the Rocky hurled at it, whether asking for its name or its place of origin, the entity stubbornly refused to give a direct answer, simply repeating that its legs were in severe pain. After a few moments of this repetitive chanting, the jinn inside the sister fell completely silent, as if deeply calculating its next move. The Rocky seized the moment and pressed harder, demanding its identity once more. Under the intense spiritual pressure, the entity finally confessed that it was a Hindu jinn and arrogantly claimed that this girl was not convenient. When the Rocky demanded an explanation, the jinn revealed that one afternoon, while the sister was hanging wet laundry out on a wire in the bright sun, the hem of her clothing had accidentally brushed against his unseen form. Furious at this explanation, the Rocky countered with fierce logic, barking back, "She was hanging clothes in the yard of her own house. There were many other family clothes out there as well. Why on earth were you loitering in her yard during the day? If she had gone to your remote dwelling and disturbed you, I would accept your complaint without a word. But you entered her home, and now you are sitting on her soul trying to terrify her? It won't happen. Run away from here right now, or you will face severe, unbearable punishment." The fierce reprimand from the Rocky broke the entity's stubborn resistance. The jinn went completely quiet for a moment, absorbing the spiritual weight of the words, before muttering incoherently, "Yes, I will go. I will go. My legs are hurting." The Rocky didn't let up, delivering a final booming ultimatum. "If you ever dare to come back near this girl again, you will be severely and brutally punished." The entity echoed the warning in a defeated, painful whisper. "Yes, if I come again, I will be severely punished. My legs are hurting." Suddenly, the sister's body went limp, and she fell backward onto the bed. The heavy, suffocating weight that had filled the room vanished instantly. There were no dramatic signs, no doors slamming open, no windows shattering, and no tree branches snapping outside. But the jinn was undeniably gone. From that exact moment, the sister became completely normal. free from the horrific madness that had plagued her nights. Yet a profound mystery remained. It was later revealed through Tanbar that the jinn had actually contacted the Raki on its own terms after the exorcism. They met in secret, but what the entity said, or what its true purpose was, remains completely unknown. The entity simply watched the healer with calculating, silent eyes and left without a single exchange of words, leaving a chilling question mark hanging over the entire encounter. Another chilling rural account comes from a dedicated remittance fighter brother named Sohel Rana, whose village home is Dawani, located within Narsingdi district. The terrifying event happened to his young uncle, who had recently gotten married. His new wife had traveled to her father's house in the neighboring village of Jitrampur, and the uncle went to visit her during the day. After spending a pleasant afternoon eating and drinking with his in-laws, he decided he had to return home that very night. He had an immense amount of demanding physical work waiting for him early the next morning, and staying until dawn would delay him. His worried wife pleaded with him to stay, warning him against traveling the dark roads at night, but the uncle was determined. After finishing a late dinner, he bid them farewell and set off on foot. The distance between his destination of Dawani village and his father-in-law's house in Jitrampur was roughly 2 to 3 kilometers. The path he chose was entirely isolated, winding tightly alongside a small flowing tributary river that eventually connected to the massive Meghna River. On one side of the narrow dirt road lay the dark, flowing water. On the other side stretched a vast, endless expanse of open crop fields. There wasn't a single house, structure, or human soul in sight for miles. It was around 9 p.m. when he began his trek. In the context of a traditional village, 9 p.m. is already the deep, silent dead of night, as the hard-working villagers regularly go to sleep immediately after evening falls so they can wake up fresh for the dawn Fajr prayers. The uncle walked steadily, covering about half the distance until he reached the most abandoned, desolate stretch of the road, where no neighborhood existed for over 1.5 kilometers. Suddenly, out of the deep shadows of the vast crop fields, a pack of massive foxes emerged, completely surrounding him from all sides. The foxes didn't run away. Instead, they stood perfectly still, fixing him with an eerie, deeply curious glare. Being a brave village man, the uncle didn't panic, rationalizing that wild foxes frequently roamed the rural fields in packs at night. He pulled out a bidi and lit it, firmly believing the old village superstition that holding a glowing fire would prevent malevolent ghosts from drawing near. Taking deep drags from his bidi, he continued walking through the moonlight, completely unaware that his supernatural ordeal was only just beginning. As the uncle walked along the narrow path, eating his bidi, a sudden and bizarre sensation made him freeze. He felt something thick, soft, and shaped like a heavy loam of fur, aggressively rubbing against his bare feet. Startled, he snapped his head down and looked to his side, and his eyes widened in absolute shock. Walking right beside him in a perfectly rhythmic manner was a massive, pitch-black dog. The animal was unnaturally large, its dark coat blending into the night, but its eyes were completely watery and normal, not glowing red like the classic demonic entities of village lore. It walked so calmly and closely that it behaved exactly like a trained, loyal pet dog. The uncle possessed a deep, traditional understanding of paranormal occurrences. He knew very well that village life required immense bravery to move around at night, and having a firm grasp of the unseen was absolutely necessary for survival. He immediately began to analyze the situation logically. There were absolutely no human localities anywhere nearby, and stray dogs never roamed these vast empty crop fields because there was no source of food or shelter for them. Dogs stayed where the humans were. Realizing this creature was entirely unnatural, he felt a wave of intense dislike and shifted his body far to the side of the road to prevent the entity from touching him again. He accelerated his pace, keeping his eyes forward. A moment later, he glanced over his shoulder and saw that the massive black dog had vanished into thin air. But before he could breathe a sigh of relief, a large cat materialized right in front of him on the path. The cat didn't block his way or make a single sound, but it sat perfectly still, observing the uncle with an unblinking, piercing stare. Unlike the dog, this cat's eyes were watering intensely, catching the faint light of the moon. The uncle had no flashlight in his hand, no torch, and no source of fire except for the tiny dim ember glowing at the tip of his beady. He carried a small box of matches, which could provide a brief flash of light if struck. But for now, he was forced to walk entirely by the silver glow of the moon. Within seconds, the silent cat vanished as well, leaving him completely alone in the creeping shadows. The rapid shape-shifting of the entities made the uncle realize with absolute certainty that he was being closely targeted by a powerful supernatural presence. He quickened his pace, his heartbeat drumming wildly in his chest as he kept moving forward along the isolated river road. A moment later, his eyes caught a massive, towering silhouette standing directly in the middle of the path just a few yards ahead. It was a colossal, pitch-black bull. The animal was gargantuan, its heavily muscled shoulders glistening under the faint moonlight. It stood perfectly still, blocking the narrow dirt track entirely, making it absolutely impossible for the uncle to bypass it without brushing against its massive flank. The uncle stopped dead in his tracks, a wave of cold dread washing over him. He knew that there was no logical way a stray bull would be roaming a deserted riverbank path in the middle of the night. Every farmer in the village safely locked away their valuable livestock inside secure sheds long before dusk. To make matters even more terrifying, as he stood staring at the beast, he noticed that its large, heavy eyes were watering profusely, exactly like the shape-shifting cat and dog that had preceded it. Knowing that showing fear to a malevolent jinn could be fatal, the uncle gathered every ounce of courage in his body. He gripped the small box of matches tightly in his hand, took a deep breath, and prepared himself for a direct confrontation. He was fully aware that these entities often use terrifying illusions to force a traveler off the path and into the deep, murky river water, where they could easily drown their victim. Refusing to fall into the trap, he stood his ground and began loudly reciting powerful Islamic prayers, calling upon Allah for immediate protection against the dark forces of the night. As the holy verses echoed through the empty night air, the uncle struck a match. The tiny, brilliant spark flared up, cutting through the heavy darkness. In that brief burning moment of light, the massive black bull vanished into thin air, as if it had never been there at all. But the supernatural entity was far from finished with him. The moment the match burned out and darkness swallowed the road again, a terrifying change gripped the surrounding landscape. Out of nowhere, the entire night turned profoundly, impossibly silent. The distant rustling of the river water, the chirping of insects, and the gentle breeze all died down instantly. Then, from the vast open crop fields right beside him, a colossal shadow began to rise. The uncle watched in pure horror as a towering, monstrous figure materialized, growing taller and taller until its head seemed to pierce the very clouds. It was a legendary Dano, a giant demonic entity of ancient village lore. The colossal being didn't just stand there, it began to walk parallel to the uncle. Every time the uncle took a step forward on the narrow dirt path, the giant creature took a massive, ground-shaking stride through the deep crop fields, keeping its terrifying, watery eyes fixed entirely on him. The uncle's blood ran cold. He realized that if he ran, the entity would crush him in a single bound. His only weapon was his faith. With his heart hammering violently against his ribs, he began to recite the Ayat al-Kursi at the absolute top of his lungs, his voice trembling but filled with desperate power. He kept his eyes locked straight ahead, refusing to look directly at the towering nightmare beside him, forcing his legs to move forward step by agonizing step. He knew that if he faltered or lost his footing for even a second, he would be completely at the mercy of the shadow. For over 20 agonizing minutes, that psychological torment continued unabated. The uncle walked along the narrow path like a man marching toward his own execution, while the colossal sky-high entity stalked him through the empty crop fields, matching his pace step for step. The air felt thick, cold, and entirely devoid of life. The uncle's throat was dry, and his voice grew hoarse from continuously screaming the holy verses into the dark void. He knew he was walking a fine line between survival and absolute madness. Then, just as his strength was about to completely give out, a small glimmer of hope appeared in the distance. The narrow dirt track finally curved away from the isolated riverbank, and began to approach the very edge of Dawani village. In the distance, the faint geometric shapes of tin-shaded village houses started to cut through the heavy gloom. The moment the uncle's boots crossed the invisible boundary line, entering the human locality, a sudden, violent gust of wind whipped through the crop fields. The uncle braced himself, and when he looked back up, the towering Dano had completely dissolved into the night air, leaving nothing behind but an eerie, ringing silence. The heavy, unnatural oppression that had gripped the road for miles evaporated instantly. Sensing that the danger had finally passed, the uncle's adrenaline faded, and a wave of pure exhaustion crashed over his body. His legs turned to water, and he stumbled the remaining few yards toward his home, practically collapsing against the front door. When his family rushed to open it, they found him pale, drenched in cold sweat, and shaking uncontrollably. It took him hours of resting and drinking holy water just to calm his racing heart enough to speak. He realized then that his wife's early warning had been a dark premonition. From that terrifying night onward, the uncle made a solemn vow to himself and his family. No matter how urgent or demanding his morning work was, he would never under any circumstance walk the isolated river roads of Narsingdi alone after the sun went down.